Ba-da-da-bum-bum, addy-addy-yeah-yeah. Ba-da-da-bum-bum, ba-da-da-bum-bum, addy-addy-yeah-yeah. Danny, define what systematic racism is for us.
Okay, I'm going to do my very best, but then Megan, our civil rights attorney, is going to add to it.
And is this systematic or systemic?
It's systemic.
Systemic.
Because I be getting roasted. I'm like, systematic. And my friends roast me. I'm like, well, I'm sorry.
Systemic.
Look, hey.
Systemic racism. So it refers to the racist and discriminatory rules, practices, customs, and procedures that were once rooted in law. And so they still exist and they still have an impact because at some point they were either co-signed by our legislation or they were actual laws. And then Megan can unpack that way better than me.
Yeah, a lot of them are actually still laws. And they've just kind of, reworked them. We see this all the time when people, the ways in which they try to limit access to voting and to the polls, the way in which they do this thing called redistricting, which they do in Texas every 10 years, and y'all start paying attention to that. But I will say, I think a lot of times systemic racism is denied. I have had infuriating conversations, which I no longer participate in because some things are not worth my energy and I'm protecting my peace. So, but it's denied because by white people, and some of the excuses that I hear is that, for them, racism is an individualistic thing, right? Yeah. Like it's, as long as I don't hate people, then I am not racist. That's very different than anti-racist. And they can't really understand because they have not experienced it, the ways in which our systems could be set up to create inequity on purpose. Right, the systems aren't. It's not that the systems are broken; they're working the way they were supposed to be. They were designed. They were designed to have us have economic inequity and to not have as much access. And every single time, it seemed like, we have the 1965 Civil Rights Act, and we have the Voting Rights Act, and we have these things that are supposed to protect us. Well, then they just find new ways to chip away at it by putting things. Barriers in front. And I think that it's important that people are starting to ask the questions. They are starting to do the self-education around systemic racism. The church is now starting to kind of wake up. But I think that evangelical church, white church, is going to have to really face its past in order for us to have a new reality and a new present. And its past is it was racist, and it protected. Not only did it protect racist people, it facilitated racist systems, cloaked in theology and cloaked in, bad readings of the Bible or impartial readings of the Bible. A lot of time religion has been used to further white supremacy and systemic racism. And so I think the church has to reckon with that. Everyone's talking about reconciliation, but we never really had conciliation, right? You can't reconcile something that's never been there. And then, I always tell white people, they're like, we just want to unify. We just want to have reconciliation. We want to come together, right? But it will cost you something. Mm-hmm. It is not free. Yeah. And you cannot have unity without repentance. Right. And people keep wanting us to just unify, like we're supposed to just take it on the chin and just unify with them without true repentance and true reckoning. And so we're going to have to, the white church, not we, I didn't create it, the white evangelicals, white Christians, white people in this country are going to have to really reckon with their place in history, their ancestors' place in history, and have true repentance before we can move forward.
Wow.
Can I say this real quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
And just for the people that's watching too, it's not repenting because you're white. Like, Jesus made you that way, and it's beautiful. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just the complacency and being complicit when it concerns racism that has been going all the way back. You know what I'm saying? In history. So please don't hear us saying, I got to repent because I'm white. No. That's not what we're saying at all. Just
Yeah.
wanted to throw that out there.
No, it's
Yeah.
good. It's good. And Megan gave a said anti-racist, and Caleb, what he just said is what being anti-racist is. So it is speaking out, it's using your voice, it's promoting, it's opposing racism. And being silent is you are saying something, even in your silence. And so Megan touched on that just when she talked about where the church has been. It goes beyond saying, love thy neighbor. You need to call out the places that you have not been loving your neighbor. Like there's got to be that acknowledgement of it in order to repent.
And I'm going to stop talking, but
No,
so
you're not.
I did
Let's
this
go.
work. Sorry, I did this work in a church in Austin before it was in vogue, and we created something called the Gospel Am, where we would have conversations around race for many years, in a very diverse, multicultural, economic, political views, all of that. Also, talking about politics was harder because, you kind of start the baseline of like, don't be racist, right? And like, you can start there and like most people can agree to that, even if they're racist and they don't know. But like politics, you don't really have that baseline. But I will say, I think that it's important that white people during this time who are not used to speaking, you are new to this, you have not done the legwork, you have not done the education, you have not used your Google properly to learn, right? to fall back and listen. Don't rush to a microphone. Don't burden the Black people in your life who you have not spoken to about this before with educating you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying to go through your Rolodex and call every Black person so that you can educate. I'm saying to go to Google like you go for anything else you don't know and do some self-education. And then when you approach your Black brothers and sisters, you can say, look, I know it is a burden. Approach them with humility. And I'm doing this because I realize white people don't have the language. So approach them with humility. I realize this is a burden for you. I realize that asking you to have this conversation with me is costly. I have done this work. I have these questions. I would be ever so grateful if you would talk with me. And they may say no. They may say they don't have the bandwidth, but they might do it. It's a different vibe than you going to them like, you're supposed to teach me. So those are my two things. Like approach it with humility and don't run to a microphone.
Yeah, because I think what's important in that is people who run to the microphone, we end up getting terms like white blessing. If we're going to be all the way real with it.
Yeah, I was going to let them make it, man. I was going to let them make it.
I was wondering if you was going to drop that.
Hey, I'm coming. And here's why that's important though, right? Like, look, and I get it, man. People making apology videos like, look, there's grace and I accept that, but we still got to talk about it because it's a teaching point. People love to redefine what things look like because it makes them comfortable. And that's what it's about. Look, I don't have the freedom to change some things. I don't. When I walk out the house, I have to live this thing every day. So I wish I could say, you know what, man, slavery for my great whoever was a blessing, but it wasn't. Because you know what happened in that? I can no longer trace my family history to where I originate at because all the records are destroyed. I know where I'm from. I know that I'm mostly West African, but I can't go there and ask hey, I'm looking for such and such because I don't know. And that's the story of a lot of us. So to sit here and say, oh, it's a blessing. No, it's not. A blessing for who?
And people know what he was trying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, I get it. People understand what he was trying to say. But in the midst of that, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying, no, you're good. But it's saying in the midst of all that, I think people get confused. You know what I'm saying? And what happens is cancel culture comes up and all of a sudden now he's canceled. And it's like, no, like, hey, like there's grace in all that. You just got to educate yourself. And when you don't educate yourself, this is what happens. So we can talk on this white blessing all night long. But go ahead.
Can I mention that one piece though? Because I think I like looking at other cultures and how they deal with things. And when you look at the Rwandan and you look at the Germans, and you see how they do what it needs to do. And this falls in line with the arrogance of our country, this whole triumphant exceptionalist type deal that they're not guilty. Dominant culture isn't guilty. And what people in dominant culture aren't willing to do is to bear the burden of your ancestors the way we have to bear the burden of ours. And I tell my friends, and it's only, I am only having conversations with people who have capacity. And one of my dear friends, her and I were talking on the phone one day, and I said, and I say to them now, my white friends know, I'm like, you look like the villain. And matter of fact, you're the villain in the story. And you look like the villain in the story, even though you may not have had slaves, and you may not have called somebody a nigger, or you may, at the end of the day, you look like it, no different than I look a certain way. And so, and that's a part of your ancestry. It's not like I think Caleb was saying, no one is saying walk around in guilt. We can do nothing with guilt, because guilt is very selfish, and it's stupid, and it sticks you in a corner, and you go, I just like, God, what am I going to do with it? It's not about you. What we're needing is a contrite heart, which causes you to move like Joseph did, to say, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And you move forward so we can join it together. But you also have to sit in the burden of your ancestors and go, yeah, this was jacked up. This was wrong. I look like it. When I walk in the museum, the Civil Rights Museum, I look at all the pictures, the people that are hanging the Black folks up by their genitals and they're doing all this, they look like me. I have to wrestle with them. My friend said her and her family used to run through the Civil Rights Museum, not even looking. They like to book in things and go, okay, well, slavery was here and it ended here, because you don't want to sit in it. And I think the exasperation for white folks is, well, how long do we have to talk about it? Or why do we, because you're not bearing the burden of your ancestors, and you won't say what it is. You won't say it out loud and deal with it, because we as Americans, they as Americans don't want to seem anything other than exceptional. Well, this was jacked up, and it's still jacked up. And the people who are jacking it up look like you, no different. And we're not going to talk about this in this forum, but no different than I have to look at my community and see some things. People that look like me. We can't ignore stuff. You don't get to ignore things either. Bear the burden of your ancestors, the way that we have to bear the burden of ours. And I think that is the frustrating thing. And if you don't know how to do it, go look at other cultures that did it. America is stuck on trying to be exceptional.
Yeah.
I just want to say, as a testament to that conversation, Chantel has literally had that conversation with me. And that was fairly early on in my teaching career. She was driving through town, we went to dinner, and it ended on that note. And it's like, what do I do with this? And so I went home and I started doing my homework, because I was really having a hard time understanding, I'm fun, I'm nice, I care about your kids, why do you not love me? And then she challenged me with that, and it's like, oh, because I do bear the burden of so much. And there is so much hurt in this relationship, and I don't just get to walk into the gym and everybody loves me. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and it can be uncomfortable. So white brothers and sisters, I encourage you to sit through that discomfort. And that discomfort at times will never go away. Sometimes you'll grapple with it and you'll feel more comfortable once you establish those relationships. That gym in particular, I was in that gym for 9 years. So I can still go into that gym. I have deep-rooted relationships there. And so there's another level of comfort. Whereas if I go into other spaces, I know and I recognize I look like a deep part of history that has been hurtful. And a deep part of the story, and it's not even history, a deep part of the present that is hurtful. And so I'm not embarrassed to be white. I don't feel guilty about my whiteness, but I do know this is a part of the burden of my ancestry of I carry this with me. And so my job now is to grapple with that and to educate and to learn and to figure out how do we move forward and how do we do it better so that we don't fall back into those pitfalls.
Yeah.
And I think even with that, Stephanie, what you said about educating yourself and having some ownership is you're also then protecting the relationship. Like if you are in relationship with Chantel or with a person of color, you're protecting them, right? Like you're not going in there to hoard information, which is sometimes what happens after a thing like George Floyd, is all of a sudden you are reaching out to your Black friend that you haven't spoken to in 10 years, for example. Right? And putting that burden on them to explain everything. And that's not their job. And so like what you said of you doing the work with yourself, educating yourself, and then being in relationship with someone, because that story is a privilege if you get to hear it. It is not something that we get to dial up. It's not something we get to consume like it's a magazine. right? Like that's something that it is trauma and it still exists, right? So if I'm going to share a piece of my story with you for something I know very well might happen tomorrow, like you better earn it and you better be careful with it.
Yeah.
For sure. Hey, Dwayne, can I add something really fast?
Yeah, go ahead, bro. Everybody jumping in. Don't wait for Alex.
Sure. I also would like to say to my white friends, individualism, Westernization, we love individualism. And can I just say one thing to that? It is a complete lie. It's a total lie. We are more interconnected than we know. We are neurobiologically interconnected, sociologically, systematically, and more important than that, we are theologically and biblically interconnected, and we're so connected and intimately connected that we're described as part of one body. And if we are not actively disrupting this system, so if I've got a ton of privilege as a male, I've got a ton of privilege as a straight dude, as an able-bodied dude, and as even the preferred minority in this country. I've got a ton of privilege. If I go to work every single day, pay my taxes, I am still part of the problem because I'm paying for the problem, right? And I'm just allowing it to happen. And because of our interconnectedness, we have a responsibility to engage in this systemic work. No matter where we fall, like we have a responsibility because of our interconnectedness. And that's why we need to stand with one another and cause disruption towards the growth systems that is causing oppression on so many people.
Yeah. Your youth group be getting that work, don't they? You be going in on somebody. Oh boy, you be going in.
So Maya, you work in education. You mentioned you're studying, you like pursuing your doctoral program. So give us some examples or what you're seeing this systemic racism play out in education.
Whew, Matt, please feel free to jump in at any point. Educational racism, man. I think one of the biggest things, and I know I called Dwayne around this time when it happened, is I walked into my doctoral program and there's about 12 of us. And as soon as I walk in, the first thing that I notice is that I'm the only person of color. So I was like, all right, this is going to be fun. I'm going to be with these people for about 3.5 years. This is going to be great. And in education, I serve in the communities that are majority Hispanic and African American. And I'm the only one from a large urban school district, as opposed to the rest of my counterparts, which are leaders in suburban areas or predominantly white areas. And so on the second day, we had a conversation, and I'm not really sure what we were talking about. And I was just like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I'm the only person of color here. And one of the women was like, oh, I didn't even notice that. I don't even see color. And first of all, like, okay. But second of all, I was like, yeah, because you don't have to. I was like, you don't have to code switch when you go somewhere. You don't have to be quiet because you don't want to be the angry person or the loud person or what is seen as the ghetto person. You don't have to really watch what you say because you have to tiptoe around conversations that other people aren't going to be comfortable with when you're the only one. I was like, you can say whatever you want to say because that's what you have been accustomed to. But in the educational field, like there's such an emphasis on like, what can we do for our Black and brown kids? Because there are so many educational gaps. And that's really like the conversation. And it's been the conversation for so many years. However, the actions that go with it aren't there. They aren't. And no matter what we do, it's not going to be enough or no matter what we say, it's not going to be enough until our actions match that. And it goes back to schools being underfunded, our educational and our history not including
Black authors, Hispanic authors, or history of either one of those, just even as a starting point, and not just on months, right? Not just on Hispanic Heritage Month, not on Cinco de Mayo, not on Black History Month, but throughout. And there are really great curriculums out there, like expeditionary learning, which we adopted at our school last year, that is rooted in teaching students the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's how we have continuous conversations about color, about equity, about injustices, not only as Black and brown students, but also as just neighborhood and being underfunded and things like that. And that's how we make the connections to what's happening in the real world and currently. But it's been continuous. And until our actions really from a whole system match, then we're going to continuously fight a losing battle.
Yeah.
I just want to add to that, like, you can certainly see white supremacy embedded in the curriculum of what we teach our students. And just from the moment of discovery of the Americas, throughout colonization, I mean, you see it embedded through and through. And I was actually on Facebook this morning, and one of my former students was like, none of my social studies teachers taught me Juneteenth. Mm-hmm. I had to learn on my own. And it's like, you know what? You're right. Like, nobody taught you Juneteenth. And I went back and I looked at the standards. It's not anywhere in there. 7th grade Texas history, not in there. 8th grade U.S. history from colonization through Reconstruction, it's not in there. We embed it in language like the 13th Amendment or Emancipation Proclamation. And I had a really cute rap to go with the 13th Amendment. And like, I did all these things, and I would talk about Juneteenth and then move on because there's so much curriculum. And so, as I said earlier, I had to do a lot of reflecting as well, because I started to realize my students are getting the whitewashed version of history. And then as I pull back the layers even further, it's a whitewashed version of all of their education. And so that's one part of it, is you see the supremacy really embedded there. The other part is the assimilation, the expectation that everyone is going to assimilate to white culture, and that white culture is the standard. And so we've been doing a lot of work with my staff of, no, like we're going to dismantle that idea that our kids bring their culture, they bring their stories, they bring their identities with them, and we're going to stop at the door of saying, okay, you put that on pause when you walk in this building, and you're going to take on this identity. No, they get to carry that with them, and our job as educators is to embrace that, teach that, incorporate that into our classroom.
I think we're taking the right steps, right? So like in high schools, there is African American studies now, there's Mexican American studies, but we have to wait until kids are in high school to get that curriculum, to get that knowledge. And that's only if they choose to enroll in that as an elective, rather than enrolling in like a fine arts or a PE or a STEM or anything else that might seem more appealing to kids. So that's definitely one way. And then another thing that happened recently in my doctoral program is I went to the restroom and everybody got to choose chapter book, like the chapters of a book. And so the only chapters that weren't chosen were systematic racism in education and cultural diversity. And guess who got them? The only minority in the group. Oh, so I like, of course I'm gonna joke about it. I'm gonna be like, oh guys, I'm the only minority and I get these 2 chapters. All right, cool. So then, you know, I'm presenting, talking about it, all the things, and they're like, afterwards, they're like, oh man, Amaya, you're so passionate about this. And then we have a discussion post a couple of weeks later about diversity in education. And and you can't see anybody's post before you post. So then I post, and then it was like, every single response was, oh my God, Amaya, I couldn't wait until you posted. And I was like, so for a moment, I stopped having that conversation. I didn't want to be the one that continuously brought up cultural or racism or minorities in education. And I stopped having that conversation, and it was hard. Mm-hmm. It was hard for me to stop having that conversation. And then I talked to like some Latina women in a doctoral program, and I was like, how can we have this conversation without being the only one that has this conversation? And that was hard. And it took me a while to be like, I don't want that to be my thing. But if I'm not going to say anything, then no one else is. And that's not okay.
Yeah. The crazy thing when you start talking about education, like I mentioned before, like living in Tulsa, Oklahoma for a year and a half, I served the John 316 mission, which is on the north side of Tulsa, which is the exact location where the massacre of Black Wall Street happened at. And they don't even teach about Black Wall Street there. And so many kids didn't even know that I got to teach kids who were born and raised in this area about it. And so when we start talking about things, and I started asking questions about what actually happened, and already did my research years before I even moved to Tulsa. But it's hard because you can drive around that part of town and you can see steps leading to where houses used to be at, right? You can still see on the sidewalk where a business used to be. And then hearing like, oh, well, the unofficial like stats is like only a couple hundred people got killed that day, but everybody knows that it's like thousands of people that were murdered. And I would drive past this tower because OSU Tulsa was right by where I used to work. And where this tower was, found out later that it was the exact place where a machine gun nest was used to gun down everybody in Black Wall Street. And so as everybody's up in arms, it's like, man, no, you got to live there because that community today is still feeling the effects of Black Wall Street. They don't have quality gas stations. They don't have quality grocery stores. Some of those kids never leave that part of town. And so it's a problem. We got to make sure that we're educating each other. But I want to move right along because we can talk about a lot of these things. Alex, I've been dying to hear from you.
Hey.
Man, tell me, I know a little bit about what you do in the workplace, but tell me, man, how are you fighting this thing of white privilege in your workspace?